World War II was the last time we officially declared war on any country.
That's
World
right.
War II. Why? Because they couldn't get enough votes to pass. I mean, think about it. Korea, a debacle. Vietnam, a debacle. Iraq, a debacle. And it's just been one after another, after another, after another, and it just goes to show you that obviously there's another agenda here than what is being showed to the people. But another thing that bothers me about the whole thing is that the people aren't holding their elected officials accountable for this. And they just allowed it to go on for years and years and years. And now the hole is dug so deep that I really truly fear that the only way to fix this is to have a complete and total collapse and start over. What do you think about that?
Yeah, unfortunately, you could be right. However, I would point out that this very year, in fact, just another month or so, we all have a chance, one last chance, okay? Now, and that's when November the 2nd comes around, and it's election time. I try to tell this to people, and everyone needs to spread this near and far, and in certain areas, it's actually working, and that is everyone who is currently in Congress can be held responsible for everything that's happening right now. And if you really like the shape the country's in, if you like the wars that we're embroiled in, then you be sure and go back and vote for those people. But if you're not really totally happy with the things that are going, then in November, vote them all out. Vote every incumbent out, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal. Vote them all out and send an indelible message to Washington that, hey, we are the people and we are in control. You don't control us. We control you. And vote them all out. Now, the problem has been in the past, I've heard this all across the country. Well, yeah, there are a bunch of crooks in Washington, but hey, our guy, he's a crook, but he's our crook, and we got a new fire engine, and we got a new road, and yeah, well, that's great, but it's time to quit and elevate ourselves over these parochial issues and start thinking about the good of the country. And as a result, see, because of that kind of thinking, then they keep voting their guys back in, and we keep going down the same old road. We need to change gears, and we need to vote everybody in Congress out, if nothing else, to send them a message that we are the boss. And number two, then what you do is, yeah, you might lose some good people, but if they're a good person, if they're a good congressman or woman, then you vote them back in when the 2 years. You vote them back in. And I think if they had one little streak of patriotic fervor, they would agree with this. Ron Paul has been a leading standard bearer for libertarian ideas and for common sense. And Ron Paul has said, yeah, I wouldn't mind sitting out 2 terms if it means that you would clean up everything. And so just vote them all out. Vote them all out and then start all over again. And at least we'd have a shot at it, because if that doesn't work and if we don't clean it up pretty soon, pretty fast, then unfortunately we're back to the scenario that you outlined in your question.
You know, Jim, starting in 2007, late 2007 and to early 2008, we had the Tea Party form. Now, in its inception, it was about change, real change, about doing the things that you just talked about. But since then, it's been taken over by these corporatists and the right-wing establishment as a way to get their people elected. Now, don't get me wrong. There's been some good things that have come from that. But in the end...
I'm totally on board with what you're saying. And you're absolutely right. The original idea of the Tea Parties was a grassroots uprising of the American population saying we're tired of business as usual and we need to do something different. In fact, that was another thing that got censored out of my book. In a section talking about how the media censors the news, I would point you to September the 12th, 2009. What happened then? Well, an estimated, unofficial, of course, an estimated 2 million Americans marched on Washington, D.C. They filled the National Mall. They paraded down Pennsylvania Avenue. At one point, it took 2 hours for these people to move past one point. There was that many people. The New York Times, Washington Post carried small stories buried back in the paper, said a crowd estimated at several 100,000, and they let it go at that. And you might not even remember that. Most people don't even know it happened because it was not covered in the corporate mass media, and yet compare that to when Louis Farrakhan had his million-man march on Washington. That was in the news for a week or more. Big deal. Well, here we got 2 million people marching against Obama's health care plan, against the giveaways and the stimulus bills and the TARP bailout, and yet they don't get any coverage. No wonder nobody knows what's going on. No wonder everybody's confused. They don't understand what's truly happening. And back to the Tea Parties, that was probably the biggest showing of the true Tea Partiers at that time. And then beginning at that time, when the powers that be saw that there was such a groundswell of agitation and of concern over what was going on, that's when they jumped in and started presenting Sarah Palin as the standard bearer. In other words, they're simply trying to swing everybody back to the old Republican-Democrat paradigm. And as Paul Volcker said, don't worry, we control them both. And that's the truth. So if you want to do something that's going to actually be in the good of the country, you need to vote for someone other than a Democrat or a Republican.
Amen to that.
Okay. May I ask a question, please? Joe?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Griff, by all means.
This is interesting. I'm enjoying listening to your answers, Jim. Thoroughly enjoying it. I wish we had another 3 hours to talk tonight. I wanted to ask you, I see you wrote a book on Watergate. Do you believe that Mo was a prostitute?
Mo? Are you talking about the wife?
Yes.
Yeah.
John Dean's wife.
Yeah. I've slept since then, so I'm a little hazy on that. But,
well, I was testing you, actually.
I can't remember. I think there was some allegations about that, but I can't remember what exactly was said. But what
she was a prostitute across the street from the Watergate at the Holiday Inn, and Heidi was her madam. And eventually she married John Dean, the president's lawyer.
Right.
And she had been married about 5 or 6 times. Her name was as long as your arm, but she was a beautiful girl, as I remember.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I can tell, and I think you'll agree with me on Watergate, was that was a presidential assassination. But unlike the Kennedy assassination, where they actually killed the guy, in Watergate, it was a political assassination of Richard Nixon. And the beauty of it is they didn't have to concoct anything on him. They simply lifted the curtain and said, look what he's doing. And at that time, back at that age, when we still had the old republic, there were enough people who were indignant about what was going on that it forced his resignation. But they've gotten smarter these days, and you rarely hear about any of the infighting that's going on like you did then.
Mm-hmm. You know, the CIA had 2 operations over there at the Watergate. I'll bet you didn't know that.
I did know that.
Did you? Over in the office complex, it was a worldwide operation. They were tied into the Vatican. They were tied into business ventures all over the world, banks, manufacturing, everything from the office complex.
It was a CIA operative, Eugene McCord, who suddenly showed up over at the committee to re-elect the president and said, oh, here, I've been working with the CIA. I know all the dirty tricks. Let me help you. And he was the one that told them to leave the tape on the door at the Watergate. He's the one that told them to turn off their radios so they maintain radio silence. And in other words, he was the guy that got them caught. And then when they got caught, it was McCord who first broke ranks and said, well, actually, I was working for the committee to re-elect the president. As far as I'm concerned, he's the central figure in pulling off that political assassination.
Yeah, and Liddy went to prison over it. my hero is Gordon Liddy. I just enjoy listening to his stories. He told some funny stories about his time in prison. The apartment they had over there, I spent a lot of time there. It was 700 New Hampshire Avenue is the address of the place, and the apartment number was 1520. It was the penthouse. Spent quite a bit of time right up on the top. We used to go up on the 4th of July and sit on the roof and watch the fireworks.
Yeah, it was probably a pretty swank place.
It was. It really was.
Paid for with campaign contributions, right?
Drug money and everything, yeah.
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 Yeah, it's see that Griff, that's the thing that really just slays me when I get to thinking about it. Back in the Middle Ages, when the king's troops came around and took half your crop and your eldest daughter, at least you knew where the pressure was coming from, and you had the option of, you either go along with it or you stage a revolution. Today, we pay those people to tyrannize us. Isn't that amazing?
Well, they steal. They're thieves and criminals running the government right now,
right.
Mostly all over the world. It's not limited just to the United States. But I don't believe that you're going to vote these people out at the ballot box. You'll never get rid of them short of revolution, short of armed conflict. And I think that's what Obama is trying to do right now, is stir the people up to cause something. I'm not very optimistic about the near future. I think something's coming down. It's going to be bad. But I many months ago started comparing the Obama administration to fascist Hitler in 1933 and Mussolini, and I still am of that opinion. This is a fascist government.
That's true. Well, here's the thing in a nutshell, and just consider this. From 1989 to 1993, we had the George Herbert Walker Bush administration, and every member of his cabinet, except for Dan Quayle, who couldn't spell potato, and his old buddy, were members of the Secretive Council on Foreign Relations.
Right.
And in 93 to 2000, we shifted. We got a Democratic administration under Bill Clinton. Oops. Every member of his cabinet, except for Secretary of Defense William Perry, was Council on Foreign Relations. Well, then we change again. We get a Republican administration under George W. Bush, and we get Dick Cheney, Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, Don Rumsfeld, Robert Gates, Elaine Chao, Christine Todd Whitman, all Council on Foreign Relations. Oh, but then in 2008, we voted for change. So we got Barack Hussein Obama, and let's look at his cabinet. Robert Gates, oops, he's still on there. Janet Napolitano, Bill Richardson, Susan Rice, James L. Jones, Timothy Geithner, Larry Summers, Paul Volcker. They're all Council on Foreign Relations. So what's changed? Nothing but the hand puppet.
That's true.
Hillary, when Hillary was the president with her husband, she appointed vast numbers of lesbian women to cabinet, to high positions. Dee Dee Myers, Janet Reno, and Donna Shalala, and just a plethora of lesbians. Were they members of the council?
I think Janet Reno may have been. Some of them were. But see, they are beginning to try to get away from that. That's why they're finding people who are not members to run in there. But then they're still they're minions, okay? They're still wannabes. And they still answer to the same masters.
Of course. Hey, Jim, I've got a caller online. I'm going to take this caller. It's Andrew from Maryland. Andrew, you're live on the show.
All right. Well, great. AC, John, and Joe, good to be with you again. And Jim Mars, pleasure to talk to you for the first time. Well, as I told you earlier, Joe and John, now I wanted to mention this and. I definitely wanted this to come out tonight, but I was seeing tonight a man by the name of Jim Willie was on Max Kaiser Friday, and it said there's a group of people, primarily Chinese and Arab right now, that they're calling them the gold vigilantes, but they are calling in the bonds that they're holding massive amounts of gold bonds. Well, you know what? They're telling me we need a break, so I'll just step off for a second.
No, let's go ahead, Andrew. It's fine.
Sure.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, basically what they're doing is they're calling in on their bonds and they're demanding real physical gold